Alright, in this video I want to talk about JavaScript event listeners. Oftentimes when you're building web pages and using JavaScript, or if you're building hybrid mobile applications, the type of programming will often be described as event-driven programming. JavaScript is often described as an event-driven programming language. So what does that mean? Well, when you have a web page and you're adding JavaScript to it, what you're doing with the JavaScript more often than not is you're trying to define and control the user's interactions with that website or that web app. So you're waiting for things to happen. You're waiting for the user to tap on something. You're waiting for the user to fill out a form, submit a form, click on a link, click on a button. These are the types of things that a user would do when interacting with that page. These are all events. So the image that you wanted on the page, finishing downloading, a AJAX fetch request to a web server, when that gets back, that's an event. The user touching something on the page, the user swiping, these are all events. Typing inside of a form field is another event. And the basic syntax that we will use in JavaScript for this looks like this. So you'll have some sort of variable here. This represents your element, your object, your div, your input tag, your link, your button, the image that was loaded, or the AJAX call. So you've got some sort of object here. This will be a variable, more often than not. Then you use the built-in add event listener method. Now this is a method that's available on practically every object, not every one, but practically every object that you're going to be working with in JavaScript. They all have this method, add event listener. And what this does is it tells the browser, hey, I'm going to define for you an event. Click, load, blur, focus, mouse down, mouse up. These are all different types of events. So you're going to define the type of event here, and then you're going to give it the name of a function to call. Now we could put an anonymous function in here without a name. We can use fat arrow functions. And if you've got a very simple one line of code that you want to do, often the fat arrow functions will be put in here. But at the very least, you're going to put the name of a function to call. So let's say I had a variable called myDiv, and I'm calling add event listener. Add event listener. And on my div, I'm waiting for a click, and I will call a function called do something. So somewhere else in my code, there will be a function with this name. When the user clicks on this div, whatever this div is, so that could be, say, this paragraph right here. This variable could be a reference to this paragraph in my HTML. When the person clicks on this paragraph, the browser knows at that point in time it is supposed to call this function do something. And inside here there will be an object that's automatically passed. The add event listener will pass into this function the event. So in this case it's a click event. We could then, if we needed to, console log or use an if statement or something like that, we could say ev.type. That will be click. This is the type of event that took place. You want to know what the element was that was clicked that caused this function to be called? Well, there's a property called target that tells you, hey, this right here, my div, that was the target. So if I do console log here, I will get that piece of HTML. Whatever that piece of HTML is, that'll be written out in my console. So you can see, through this event object, I'm going to be able to get back to the type of event that happened. I can get back to the object that it happened to. So if I've got 6 things that are all using the same function, I can figure out which one of the 6 things was actually clicked and then do something with that. All right. So that's the basic idea behind it. Let's do a few practical examples. Oh, actually, one last thing I just want to comment on. When people start programming with events, something that sometimes gets missed is the fact that in here I'm putting the name of my function, but the name does not use these right here. The parentheses are not put onto the end because in my code somewhere else, if I was to write do something, and then on another line I write do something like this. These two lines are very different. This one, it's just giving the name of the function. It's just like if I said to you, if your name was Bob and I said Bob. I'm not saying to do anything, it's the name. Here, because I added the parentheses at the end, I'm telling this function, hey, at this point in time, you are supposed to run. So that is going to make this run, and then inside this function, if I was to return the number 7, when this event happens at some point in the future, because I told the function to run right here in this line of code, it's going to run, the number 7 is going to be passed back to here, and then this is what's going to be left in your code. When the div actually does get clicked, the browser's just going to think to itself, 7. It's not going to do anything. So we want to be very careful that we just put the name of the function. Don't add the parentheses onto the end of it. All right. So I'll leave that out. Comment this. And I'm going to comment that, and I'll put these all at the bottom. So they'll still be in the file when I leave it in the code gist, but we're just not going to be using that code for our actual examples. Now, if we look at the web page, see what we have to work with here. We have a button with the ID BTN. We have an anchor tag with the ID LNK. It points to google.com. There's an input tag, which is a form element, a text input, and it's got an ID of TXT. If we were to look inside the web page, this is what it looks like. There's a button, there's a link, there's an input. And we want something to happen. We're just going to do console logs, but it could be anything you want. You can just get your functions to do whatever you want. In these examples, I'm going to say when the person clicks on this button, write something down here. When the person clicks on this link, write something down here. When the person types something here, write something down here. When the person taps on the keyboard without being inside the text field, if they're just using the keyboard, if I hit the enter key, I want something to happen down in the console. So those are going to be the 4 events that we're going to look at. And there's one more that we'll talk about after we've got those ones working. I have my script tag at the very bottom of the page here. The reason I have the script tag at the bottom is I want this script to be aware of these 3 elements and the IDs that they belong to. The browser will read this HTML from the top to the bottom. So when it reads this script, it will have already read these and it will know about these elements. So this is important for what we're doing here. If my script were up in the top and I told it to add a click listener to the button, for example, it wouldn't know what the button is because it hasn't read down into the body yet. It hasn't read that part of the code. So we put our script at the bottom so we can use those. All right, so let btn equal, I'll just use the simple get element by ID. That's my button, my link, get element by ID, LNK, and last one, TXT. There we go. So those are my 3 objects on the page that I'm going to work with. Let's start with a click event. This is a very common event to use. I'm going to say btn, that is my element, add event listener, just like we did here, object, add event listener, and then what's the event type? It's going to be a click. And at the very end, I'm going to call a function. I'm just going to make up a name, button click. It's good to use function names that are very descriptive so you know what they're supposed to be doing. So function button clicked is going to run. I will have the click event passed to my function, and then I can do console.log ev.type. So that should say click, ev.target. And there's another related property called current target, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to attach this So this function will be called, but not until I click on this button. So let's save, we'll go back to our web page, refresh this. When I click the button, there we go. Click was the type of event, and the target and current target, a lot of the time these will be the same value in these properties. But there it is, there's the piece of HTML that was clicked, that had the click event happen to it, that we listened for. Okay, excellent. Now for the link, the second one, lnk, add event listener. Again, we're going to listen for a click event, and we're going to call, let's call it link clicked. Pass the EV to it, and let's try doing the exact same thing that we did here. Save that. Now something's going to happen here, which is not what we want, but I'll click on this. That still works. I'll click on this. Hey, we didn't get our console. We've actually traveled to the google.com or google.ca page. So why did that happen? Well, when you click an anchor tag, the browser knows it's supposed to take you to this address. That's just its default behavior. Doesn't matter what you want to do, that's the behavior that it wants to carry out. So even if it's in the middle of running a function, you told it. The user said, hey, I clicked the link, I want to go there. So what we want to do is we want to stop that default behavior from happening. And luckily for us, there is a built-in method called prevent default, belonging to every object. So ev prevent default. This will stop the link from being followed. Okay, come back, refresh this. That still works. And now this works. There we are. We had the click event, and it's happening to this anchor tag. You can see it's the anchor tag, the text that's inside of it, the ID, all of it. That whole object, that is the thing that was being clicked. So we stop the link. This is something that you need to do if you're using anchor tags or if you're using forms. When somebody clicks a button inside of a form, the browser's default behavior is to want to submit that form. So if you want to stop the form from being submitted and the web page from being reloaded, you'll have to do an ev prevent default. Now, one alternative to this, because I used named functions in here, I did mention earlier you could use an anonymous function. So I just want to show you that alternate syntax here. Comment this out. Okay, instead of naming the function, we can put the function here. So this can be an anonymous function. It will have ev passed to it, and then inside here, let's put the one. There we are. There's the type and target. This will work the same. Now the difference between these two is really, it's a question of what you're going to be doing in your code. Is this function something that you're going to be calling from other events, from other places in your code? Do you want to be able to reuse your function? So here, because it's got a name and it's defined separately, I could use that from other places in my code. Here, I'm saying, no, this is something that I'm only ever going to be doing from here. And if you want to use the new ES6 fat arrow syntax, we can do that too. Strip this out. I'll leave a link in the bottom to the video on the fat arrow syntax. But same sort of thing, and because this is just one line of code, we can even bring this down. There's one parameter, we can get rid of those, and we can just do that. Okay, there we are. So a single line does the whole thing. So link, when it's clicked, call a function, pass ev into the function, and this is the one thing that we're going to be doing. Just show you that it does still work. Click the button, click the link. Oh, no, there isn't just one thing. We're also doing prevent default, aren't we? There we go. So I do need to keep the curly braces there because I am doing EV prevent default. Refresh, and there we go. There's the link. Okay, great. So that's a click event being used on a button and an anchor. We have another event. It's not just click events that we're doing with this. The text, we're going to add event listener. We're going to listen for the input event. And this will be one of the fat arrow functions. Input is when somebody is filling out a text field. So over here, as I'm typing inside of here, when I'm done, if I hit the tab key to move on, or if I click somewhere outside of the form, if the contents of this have changed from when I first clicked on the field, when I first tabbed to it and put focus on this field, if the contents have changed, that will trigger the input event. So console.log, and I want to know the contents, ev.target, that is the input, and I want to know what's the new value of what the person has typed. So target is the input element, this thing right here, and I want the value property. That is whatever the person has now typed. All right, refresh this. ABC, there we go, A, B, C. So I'm changing the value of what's typed inside there. D, E, F. You can see every time I change the value, I didn't even need to click away from this. Every time I change the value, it's triggering my input event. There's another similar related one. There's a change event. This is the one that is not on every key press. It's just when the person leaves the field. Not the web page, but the field. Got the same things there. And one last one to show you, blur. So these are three similar, related type is what I want to see in here as well. We're going to want to know which one of the event listeners is calling this. So input, change, and blur. Three similar events. When I click here and I click away, blur is being called. I click back, I type A, the input event just fired. When I leave, change and blur both fire. The change event happened because when I clicked on the field, it was blank. When I left it, when I blurred, it was different. It was no longer blank, it was now A. If I click on it again and click away, the blur event will fire, but the change event won't, because the change event only happens when I blur if there's been a change. B, click away, now the change event fires. So input, change, and blur. Three similar, related events. Okay, so we have all these event listeners. Now, one other that I wanted to show you was having to do with all this content being here and the script tag being at the bottom. Close this and put this up at the top like that. Come back to the web page and I refresh. There, I'm getting an error on line 8. Cannot read property add event listener of null. So add event listener on line 8, it couldn't read txt. It didn't know what txt was. Txt said, go find me the thing with the ID txt. Well, at this point in my HTML, there is nothing with the ID txt. So therefore, this is null. And then we're trying to add an event listener to null. To prevent problems like this from happening, what we're going to do is we're going to take these add event listeners. We don't need the function, it can go on its own, but we'll take this one here and put it back up. So all of this code right here, all of this, we're going to be putting this inside of another function. So highlight, tab it over. I'm going to create a function called init. There we go. This function, I don't want that function to run until the browser has finished reading all of the HTML and it knows about all the IDs on the page. That is actually an event itself. So if we come inside here and we say document, well, the document object exists, that's our web page. We can add an event listener to the document, and the event we want to listen to is DOM content loaded. When that fires, when this event happens, that's when I want this to run. And this event means the browser has finished reading through all the HTML. So after I've read through all the HTML, then I can go and do all this. Back to our web page, refresh, no JavaScript errors, and I can carry out all of these event listeners. All these functions work now because I was able to target those three things and add the event listeners after the browser had read everything. So this allows us to put our script tag up inside the head and have the event listeners still work. Okay, excellent. So that's a fairly detailed introduction to JavaScript event listeners. If you have any questions, please, as always, leave them in the comments.